Different situations require different responses, and that's really the key accountability for senior executives in any organization. I'm going to run through a couple of examples of changes that need to be made based on different scenarios that were going on, just to show you the variety of options that are available. I'm going to start with Air Canada. Their CEO at the time, Robert Milton, came to see how poorly the major legacy airlines were performing financially. He became convinced that various parts of the airline operated separately could be worth more than the combined company. And he proposed that the company examine its various functional areas to find unrealized value in divisions that could be standalone entities. Then Air Canada could consider each business for carving out, basically separately incorporating each subsidiary and selling a fraction of the shares, or spinning them off, divesting through a distribution of all the new company's shares. Just 2 weeks after Milton became CEO, Air Canada was the object of a hostile takeover bid that required an unplanned merger with Canadian Airlines, the country's second largest airline. The inability to integrate the two airlines quickly brought some infrastructure and labor inefficiencies in the short term. Then the collapse of the dot-com industries in 2000 curtailed business travel almost completely. Just as Air Canada was adjusting to this downturn, the September 11 U.S. Terrorist attacks further reduced the number of passengers and required expenditures for security. Meanwhile, fuel prices began to climb precipitously. Then there was the SARS outbreak, the severe acute respiratory syndrome that hit China and Canada, wiping out travel to the Far East and to Canada, particularly to Toronto, which was Air Canada's hub. And while declining passenger numbers and little liquidity, Air Canada filed for the Canadian equivalent of U.S. Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Bankruptcy was the change that they decided. It's what provided a respite for the beleaguered airline and allowed Milton and his team to finalize the restructuring. Management streamlined operations and began breaking up the organization into its subsidiaries. And the company emerged from bankruptcy in 2004 as a holding company, Ace Aviation Holdings Incorporated, with 10 wholly owned subsidiaries. By the summer of 2006, Milton was well into the test of his theory that the parts of the airline were worth more than the airline itself. The company had carved out Aeroplan, its frequent flyer program, and Jazz, its regional airline, and had publicly discussed spinning off the maintenance unit. The one large asset remaining was the airline, Air Canada itself. A comparison of the Ace share price to the sum of its part implied that a negative value for Air Canada. But would carving out the airline capture additional value? What would the costs and benefits? If Air Canada was sold, what should the structure be? When should the sale take place? And since selling the airline would mean that all the pieces of Ace were carved out, what would become of the holding company and its CEO? In 2008, Ace completed its divestment of Aeroplan and Air Canada's regional airline affiliate, Jazz. After these divestments, Ace retained a 75% stake in Air Canada and a 23% stake in Air Canada Technical Services. In 2012, Ace sold all of its shares and warrants it held in Air Canada, and now Air Canada is running independently as a single unit company. So that was one example of how management had to deal with a very, very difficult situation. Alcoa, different situation. In early 2014, Alcoa announced that Ford's F-150 pickup trucks, the best-selling vehicles in the U.S., would use aluminum rather than steel in the truck bed and cab. Starting with the 2015 model, the F-150 would be the first mass-market vehicle to be built with major body construction from aluminum. Alcoa spent $300 billion expanding its Iowa factory and planned another $150 million on facilities in Tennessee to meet the demand generated by the Ford contract. The aluminum industry's growing success in the automotive sector reflected the response of auto manufacturers to the increasingly rigorous fuel economy standards for U.S. vehicles and consumer preferences for high-mileage vehicles. To meet those standards, automakers had become using Alcoa to reduce vehicle mass, allowing a smaller, more efficient engine to produce the same performance with increased miles per gallon. For example, the F-150 switch to aluminum for 2015 was a major part of the savings of the 700 pounds in the vehicle weight compared to the 2014 model. But Alcoa still faced significant challenges in selling to the auto industry. First, there was the problem of consumer perceptions. Car and truck buyers tended to believe that aluminum was not as strong as steel, especially in the truck market, where Ford promised that its trucks were built Ford tough. Beliefs in the vulnerability of aluminum could hurt sales. Aluminum was already more expensive than steel, and increased demand could drive aluminum prices even higher. Automakers had long relationship with steelmakers, and for over a century had generated their production to steel components. Steelmakers were working on lighter alloys to compete with aluminum. Meanwhile, manufacturers of carbon fiber-based composites were touting their material was even lighter than aluminum and just as strong. Plastic manufacturers were also increasing their lightweight alternatives to specific automotive components. Ford and Alcoa collaborated on a more formidable and design-friendly next-generation aluminum alloy. Alcoa's breakthrough was called micromill technology, and it debuted on the 2016 Ford F-150. Ford was going to be the first automaker to use the advanced automotive aluminum commercially. Micromill material is 40% more formidable than today's automotive aluminum, creating more design-friendly aluminum. The use of the micromill aluminum alloy for the 2016 F-150 started in the fourth quarter of 2015 on some components, with additional parts transitioning to the new material in 2016. So here's an example where innovation was the solution to the situation at hand for Alcoa. American Greetings. This one's very interesting. American Greetings had spent decades in a comfortable position. Beginning at the turn of the 20th century, it had helped create a mass market for the greeting card and had presided over its growth into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Because the manufacturing of cards, especially those with special designs or attachments, could be complex, and because customers were used to choosing from a large selections of cards, it was difficult for new players to offer what the big established card companies that could give them any serious competition. By the end of the 20th century, American Greetings was the second largest greeting card company in the world after Hallmark, and it bought out several of its lesser competitors. It had expanded its expertise to become a major manufacturer of gift wrap, party goods, stationery, calendars, and other social expression products. And it also had been successful as the creator of licensed characters such as Holly Hobbie, Strawberry Shortcake, and Care Bears. But the core of its business remained the profitable greeting card. As Senior Vice President and Executive Supply Chain Officer Michael Golder put it, the average card has 25 to 40 cents of variable cost in it. We wholesale it for $1 or so the retailer sells it for $3. This is a wonderful industry. However, by the late 1990s, the business had become more challenging. Growth in greeting card sales stagnated, and existing customers began to turn to online cards. At the same time, the company began to experience pressure from retailers who wanted an increasingly larger share of healthy margins. Greeting cards were still a wonderful industry, but there were worries about the future. As executives began to look for cost-cutting strategies, it became clear that the manufacturing process needed to be re-examined. In Golder's words, because of the way the industry worked for a long time, we were late in focusing on the efficiency of our operations. But the question turned out to be complex because American Greetings had incomplete data on its manufacturing costs and no data on outsourcing alternatives. Before it could decide on a plan for reducing costs, it had to more precisely measure the company's current costs for machinery, production, labor, and transportation. Then the company had to decide on the most effective way to economize. Two main options rose to the top: improvements in process and technology and outsourcing to China. A number of executives assumed that the answer lay in moving productions overseas, but others argued that more savings could be obtained by improving existing facilities and upgrading legacy equipment. In March of 2005, partisans of outsourcing and partisans of upgrading were both making their cases as the company looked to determine the future of manufacturing. American Greetings has also branched out into the internet and now owns a series of websites, including electric greeting cards and expressive content, things like emojis and things like that. And basically, what turned out to be the right decision for them is their entire operation was moved to Westlake, Ohio. It basically looked at cutting their process, streamlining their process, and improving upon their technology. So in this particular case, yes, they innovated, but they innovated through real re-engineering and cost-cutting to get to the results that they needed to continue to move forward as an organization. The last one I want to talk to you about quickly is the TIAA, which is a Fortune 100 financial services organization, which made dramatic changes in 2016. The organization changed its name from the clunky TIAA CREF back to its original simpler name, which is TIAA. It widened its products beyond retirement options to a full range of financial investment options. It expanded its advertising in print, on television, and online advertisements. It updated and began more thoughtful use of social media accounts on Facebook and Twitter. The company continued to serve the financial needs of people in academic, government, medical, cultural, and other nonprofit fields. In its refocus, it predicated its brand on three strong pillars, which were: we are on your side, the customer side; we will be simple, smart, and authentic; and we are an engaged ally, understanding and here for our customers whether they have $5 or $5 million. Also known for its solid financial management, TIAA's conservative investment philosophy had allowed it to weather the financial turmoil better than some of its competitors. TIAA has emerged from the most recent financial panic as one of the few financial service companies able to maintain top ratings for its products. One continuing challenge for TIAA was engaging workers under 35 years old, understanding that they were in their lives and understanding where they were in their lives and finding messages that would encourage them to plan for their financial futures, including saving for their retirement years. Once these younger workers started thinking about securing their futures, the head of marketing, Weaver, hoped to convince them that TIAA could be their allies as they dealt with the immediate issues in their lives and beginning to plan for long-term well-being. In 2016, with its new branding in place and its mission clear, the organization was looking to create messages and methods to reach these employees as they moved into their financial future, the employees being the contracts that TIAA had with other organizations. By defining and addressing the barriers that often prevented this growing segment of the workforce from thinking long-term, TIAA could help them balance their current life demands with the long-term planning they needed to do for retirement. Weaver and others at TIAA realized that the longer-term growth of the organization required attracting additional customers. One target was new employees at institutions it served as they came into the organization, particularly those under 35 years old. In a major shift from its near monopoly status in recent decades, TIAA in the 21st century found itself as the only one of several retirement providers offered to employees. Market research had revealed that many employees of these institutions, particularly younger ones, were not as aware of TIAA as they were as other options. The company was competing against industry giants such as Fidelity, which had much larger and broader marketing footprints. Basically, TIAA was in a niche market for nonprofits, whereas clearly Fidelity was more broadly based in its approach. Upon deciding on younger customers, Weaver's challenge was to identify the best way to position the company to increase overall awareness among millennials. How could TIAA then let these individuals know that TIAA could serve their retirement planning and other financial needs? What messages and what messages and channels would be most effective? How could TIAA reach the men and women who are beginning their jobs at the institutions TIAA served? In addition, Weaver had to find ways to educate customers about the advantages of TIAA's offerings. What was the best way to build on TIAA's not-for-profit heritage, the objective advice, the deep commitment to investors' financial well-being? And what voice was most likely to reach the under 35-year-old customers whose immediate financial needs often made retirement seem a far distant concern? So in this case, in terms of dealing with their challenges, TIAA just basically looked at it as expanding into new markets, increasing the folks, who their target audience was going to be. Very different from the previous examples. So hopefully that was useful. We're going to get deeper into these cases as we proceed forward with our subject matter. And thank you for your time and attention.